If you've got the cash or you have the investment dollars to make a purchase, to buy something, maybe it's a vehicle, maybe it's a home addition, maybe it's a new furnace, a new roof, I don't know what it is, but you've got the cash or you have the investments. Should you always use that cash or the investments, or should you take a loan instead? I've got some perspective coming up. My name is Mike Bernard. I'm the host of the Wise Money Show. I'm also one of the certified financial planners right here at Cohorn Financial Group. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and smash that thumbs up button. Get this question all the time as well, and that is, all right, so I've got to make a purchase, okay? So I'm buying a car, or I'm buying a boat, or I'm making a renovation on the house. Maybe I'm buying furniture. Maybe I've got to do a new furnace, or I've got to do a new roof, something like that. Like not an enormous purchase like a big house, right? But a not a small purchase either, like, making a purchase on Amazon. I've got a substantial purchase. I got the cash, or I've got the investments. Should I pull the money out of my cash or out of my investments, or should I take out a loan? Now that's a financial planning decision ultimately, and I know it's very kind of simple, depends on the circumstances, but you've got to look at your entire financial position, because when you're using cash or when you're using your investments, there's cash flow ramifications, there's protection planning ramifications, there's investment ramifications, could have ramifications on your retirement plan. There's obviously going to be some tax ramifications we're going to get into now, but what should you do? Should you use your cash, should you use your investments, or should you get a loan? Now, there's a few circumstances where I would tell you you're definitely going to want to use the loan. But before I get into those, I'm not going to talk about the mathematics of it. And some of you might say, well, that's ridiculous, thumbs down and leave. And I hope you don't do that. But the math suggests at any time you should always take a loan. Okay? That's why I'm not going to talk about it, because the long-term return of a future expected return of a long-term investment, i.e. diversified mix of the stock market or large, mid, small markets, international markets, whatever it is, the long-term potential return is historically 8, 9, 10%, okay? You could even say 8, 9, 10, 11, 12%, somewhere in there, okay? And therefore, as long as your interest rate is below that number, and today, what is it, 3%, or 4%, 5% maybe on a line of credit, as long as your long-term future potential return is higher than that interest rate, you should borrow as much money as possible. Mathematically, I agree with you, okay? There's no question about that. Mathematically, I agree with you. No one has a crystal ball. I have no idea where the stock market will be in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years. But historically speaking, the long-term average rate of return is going to beat that of an interest rate that you'd pay when you're borrowing money. But there's more than just math when it comes to managing your overall financial life. Because if you take that to the extremes, meaning you can always earn more, a higher long-term rate of return by investing it than paying down debt or than avoiding debt, then every year you should refinance your mortgage. Every year you should get the maximum amount of leverage as possible. And you don't do that. You don't do that because there's risk and there's cost associated with doing that. The risk is any disruption in your income. If you can't make those mortgage payments, bam, you're bankrupt, right? So there's more than just that math that you need to consider, okay? How do you get that balance right for you? You've got to look at your overall financial goals, your financial priorities, sit down with your certified financial planner. They can talk to you about, yeah, you know what? The right level of debt or the right level of debt service, therefore the right level of investment. It's all tailor-made. It's got to be unique to your situation. There's not a one-size-fits-all on that spectrum of should you always use cash or should you always use debt, okay? Because always use debt because of the math, if you take that to the extremes, I mean, you would refinance your mortgage every year, or you would just use an ARM every single year. And if you have a disruption in your income, like we saw with COVID, like we saw with the Great Financial Crisis, or whatever else, then all of a sudden you go from, hey, this is really working, to I'm completely bankrupt, okay? So most people don't want to take that level of risk. So does that mean the opposite is true then? that you should always use cash when you have it. No. And I'm going to highlight 3 reasons why, even though you have the cash or the investments, you'd probably want to take a loan instead when you're making a meaningful purchase. So if you're on Social Security and in retirement, the amount of your Social Security that is taxable depends on all of the other income that you have, okay? So if you've got a small pension and you've got your Social Security and then you're drawing a little bit out of your investments, you've got to look to see that ratio. Your certified financial planner will look at that ratio with you. I've done a couple videos about that as well to determine how much of your Social Security is actually taxable. So then, if you decide, hey, we want to put a new deck on the house, we're going to need 20 grand, 15 grand, I don't know, okay? If you draw that out of your investments, if you just say, well, I've got the cash there, I've got $1 million sitting there in my investments, we want to put on this deck, I don't want to have to worry about it, give me the cash. You draw that $15,000 out of your IRA, and this is rough math, but you're going to have to pay tax on that $15,000. But depending on your situation with your income taxes and Social Security, that could cause another $12,000 of your Social Security to become taxable. That's right. You pull out $15,000 and you've got to pay tax on $27,000. Now that's just a rough example, but the number one reason why, if you have the cash or if you have the investments, you still might want to consider borrowing for a meaningful purchase is because it may cause you to pay more tax on your Social Security than you otherwise would. And typically I'm bringing this up in retirement because before retirement, you might not have all that cash available to make these purchases, but you also can't access your retirement plans and your IRAs, your 401ks whenever you want. So when you're in retirement, the number one reason why you might want to consider a loan versus just pulling the dollars out is it might cause more of your Social Security to be taxable. I just did this recently with a client of mine who I think needed to do a home repair, something like that. It was going to be about 15 grand. And so they said, okay, I know we've got the dollars there. They've got, a decent amount, plenty to draw out to be able to pay cash for this. And I said, listen, when you need to do that maintenance, whenever that time comes, use the line of credit first. So borrow the money first. And then what we'll do is likely this fall, do some math to determine exactly how much you should draw out of your IRA without making too much of your Social Security taxable. We'll draw that chunk out and we'll pay it down the line of credit. Then on January 1st or January 2nd, we'll do that math again. How much can you draw out in the year 2022 where it's not going to cause your Social Security to be taxed too much? Let's draw that amount out and pay that on the line of credit as well. So even though they're borrowing it, I think they were going to do the maintenance in September, October. They were going to put the money on the line of credit. They'd have a chunk that we'd put down right away, another chunk that we'd draw out of the IRA in January and put that down as well. And then finally, we draw another chunk out in January, right at the beginning of the following year, 2023, and that should be enough to pay it off. So instead of causing more of their Social Security to be taxable and paying the tax on that when they otherwise wouldn't, they're going to pay a little bit of interest, 3-4% on their line of credit, so that they save tax dollars. Yeah, it'll cost them a little bit of borrowing, a little bit of interest cost, but it will save them tax dollars along the way. The second reason in this similar circumstance where you're in retirement and you have the cash, the resources to make this purchase with cash, why you'd want to consider a line of credit is IRMAA. That's right. Your Medicare Part B and Part D premium payments are based on your adjusted gross income, your AGI. And when your income exceeds too much, exceeds a certain threshold, you have to pay the normal Medicare Part B or Part D premium amount plus an IRMAA, which is an income-related Medicare adjustment amount, monthly adjustment amount, and where you have to add a little bit more, you have to pay more for your Medicare Part B and Part D, not because you're getting anything extra, but because your income was too high. So say, for example, in retirement, you've got your Social Security, you've got your IRA withdrawals, maybe you've got some pension, whatever, and in this case, you want to buy a new car, and the new car is a new car. Okay, so it's 60 grand. Well, in order to take the 60 grand out and cover the taxes on it, say you need to take out 75,000. All of a sudden you take $75,000 out of your IRA and you can afford it, okay? So from a retirement standpoint, it doesn't crash your retirement plan. but you take that $75,000 out, you add that onto your adjusted gross income, and all of a sudden you're into that next tier. You're into that next IRMAA, that threshold where you're going to pay more for your Medicare Part B and Part D. Will you immediately pay that extra amount? No, you won't. It's called the prior year rule, meaning the amount that you pay for your Medicare Part B and Part D is based on your income from 2 years ago. So you draw this extra, this $75,000 out, your financial advisor or financial professional or E-Trade or whomever isn't talking to you about your taxes. And then, 12 months to 24 months from now, you get a letter from Medicare saying, hey, congratulations, you're going to pay more for your Medicare Part B and Part D. You weren't even aware of it. In those circumstances, you're going to want to do the math and see how much could you withdraw from your IRA without subjecting yourself to that IRMAA threshold. Take that amount out and borrow the rest for that car purchase or whatever that big purchase is. And then just like the last example, do some proactive tax planning to see, well, how much should I draw out the next year and the next year so that I'm still paying the least amount for my Medicare Part B and Part D, but also managing my interest cost as well. So that's another reason why even if you've got the cash, you may want to consider getting some loan instead of just using all cash. And then the final reason, let's step aside from being in retirement. Should you take a loan when you've got the cash instead? Typically, if you've just got cash in your savings account, it's not earning much interest. But if you're borrowing some dollars, it's going to be 3, 4, 5%, and therefore, mathematically, it's in your benefit to actually use your cash instead of borrow the money, unless you completely deplete your savings, okay? So that's the non-retirement example of when you've got the cash to make this purchase, but you use a loan instead purely to keep your cash from being completely depleted, okay? You wanna make sure that you've got a buffer, some margin, an emergency fund, a confidence account, something like that, so that if a surprise comes up, you can manage it with your cash flow. What surprise? I have no idea. Guys, I have no idea. Last week, we called the garage door repair person to come out, and they said, yeah, it's gonna be $175 just for them to come out. That will go against labor if we have to do anything for you. Oh my goodness, didn't want to stomach that. Fine, go ahead. They came out and fixed one garage door. 2 days later, the other garage door broke. I'm not kidding. I have no idea. They have yet to come back out, but I have no idea if they're going to say, hey, couple grand, you got to replace your garage door. I don't know. You have no idea. These things are unforeseen. And if you completely deplete all of your cash just to avoid a loan, then you're not prepared for whatever might come. So have the right balance, okay? Should you use some of your cash and then some loan? Possibly. Work with your certified financial planner. All right, for each of those examples and the infinite number of other possibilities, your CFP should know your financial life as well, if not better than you. Help you determine, well, how much is the right amount of debt to take on? How much is the right amount of leverage? When should you use cash? When shouldn't you? What's your tax situation? What's your emergency fund situation? What's your cash flow situation? They're in your corner looking at all of those factors and helping to guide you when those decisions come up. So work with your CFP. If you don't have one on your team, contact one on my team. Find us online, corehorn.com. That's corehorn with a K. wisemoneyshow.com. You can find us there as well, or send us an email, info@corehorn.com. All right, there you have it. Go out and take your next wise step in your financial life.